Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today into something pretty universal, families, but we're going to be looking at it from a specific perspective of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
And the source material for our deep dive is a talk called Parents and Children.
Okay.
This was given by Dallin H. Oakes, who was first counselor in the first presidency of the church back in October 2018.
Yeah, it's interesting going back and looking at this talk from 2018 because you can already see some of the trends that President Oakes was talking about.
Yeah.
Kind of coming to fruition now. He was already talking about declining birth rates.
Right.
And people delaying marriage and starting families. And, this was concerning to the church because family is so central to their beliefs.
Yeah, and this whole idea of eternal families.
Right.
It kind of sets the stage for how they view parenthood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not just about raising kids for 18 years and then you're done.
Right.
It's about an eternal commitment.
Right. It's like an internal perspective.
Exactly.
So one thing that really jumped out at me in the talk was this study from the University of North Carolina. And it basically found that Latter-day Saint teenagers were kind of like acing it.
Yeah.
When it came to navigating adolescence.
That's right. They were avoiding risky behaviors, doing well in school, and they had a generally positive outlook on life.
It's like they had this secret weapon or something.
It's like they knew something that other teens didn't, right?
Right. And President Oakes suggests that maybe part of the reason they were doing so well was because of their understanding of God's plan for them.
Right.
That they knew they were children of God. They had this inherent worth and this path laid out for them.
Like a roadmap.
Yeah, and that gave them this confidence to make good choices, even when faced with peer pressure.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's like when you know where you're going, you're less likely to get sidetracked.
Right.
And I think that applies to all of us, whether or not we're religious. It's about having a purpose in life, something that gives you meaning and direction.
Yeah.
So it's not just about having faith,
right,
but about having a sense of purpose in life.
Totally. And, another big theme in the talk was the role of women, particularly as mothers. And President Oakes really leans into this. He brings in teachings from other church leaders to highlight how important motherhood is in God's plan. He even quotes President Gordon B. Hinckley, who was a previous prophet of the church.
Yes.
And President Hinckley basically said that for most women, being a mother is like the ultimate fulfillment.
He said it brings the greatest happiness and is the greatest fulfillment.
Yeah. And he actually shared a pretty powerful quote about it.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
Do you remember it?
He said something like, the greatest job that any woman will ever do will be in nurturing and teaching and living and encouraging and rearing her children in righteousness and truth.
Yes, that's the one.
It's quite a statement.
Yeah. About
the power of motherhood.
And this emphasis on motherhood isn't just like a random opinion.
Right.
It's woven into the church's doctrine.
Exactly.
They even have this document called The Family, a proclamation to the world.
Yes.
That lays out their beliefs about families. And it clearly states that mothers have this like special and irreplaceable role.
Right. And it's not about diminishing other roles that women can have.
Right.
But it's about recognizing the significance of motherhood in God's plan.
Absolutely. And, President Oakes doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He also brings in a quote from President Russell M. Nelson, who was the prophet of the church at the time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because President Nelson calls for women to be courageous defenders of morality and families.
Yes, that's a really powerful phrase.
It is.
He's basically saying that the world needs women to stand up for what's right.
Right.
Especially when it comes to families and raising children.
And I love that he's not just saying that mothers should be nurturing within the home, but that they also need to be advocates for what they believe in.
In the wider world.
Yeah.
Be a force for good.
Exactly. And it makes me think back to those thriving Latter-day Saint teens we were talking about earlier. Do you think maybe having strong, righteous mothers played a role in their success?
Oh, for sure. I think that's a huge factor. I mean, the influence of a mother is so powerful.
It really is.
And speaking of influences, President Oakes also talks about something that was really relevant back in 2018.
What's that?
Cell phones.
Oh, yeah. He goes there.
He doesn't shy away from addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say the phone in our pockets.
Right. Well, this was right when smartphones were becoming like ubiquitous.
Yeah, everyone had one.
Yeah, and President Oaks shares some pretty eye-opening statistics.
Oh, yeah, about how many teenagers feel anxious when they're away from their phones, how much time they're spending on them.
He even mentions a nationwide survey that found that over half of U.S. teens felt like they were spending too much time on their phones.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, even back then, this was a big concern.
And it's only gotten worse since then.
Right, but what's interesting is that he doesn't just tell them to ditch their phones.
Right.
He connects it to something much deeper.
Yeah, what's that?
He's essentially saying, don't let technology distract you from what really matters.
Yeah.
Your relationships, your purpose, your connection with God.
Right. It's about finding that balance between the virtual world and the real world.
Totally. And this actually leads us to another really impactful part of the talk.
Yeah.
His message about kindness. He even shares this really heartbreaking story about a refugee youth who was bullied and mistreated.
Oh, yes. That story is so powerful. It really shows how devastating unkindness can be.
Right. And what's really poignant is that President Oaks points out that many of the bullies in this case were actually Latter-day Saint youth.
Oh, wow.
Which is like, makes you think, right?
Yeah, it does.
Even in a faith community that emphasizes love and compassion,
right,
we can still fall short.
It's a reminder that we're all human.
Yeah.
And we all have the capacity for both good and bad.
Absolutely.
So we need to be constantly checking ourselves, making sure that our actions are matching our beliefs.
And I think that's a good place to pause.
Okay.
And we'll pick up in part 2.
Sounds good. Okay, so picking up where we left off, President Oaks really dives into these strengths of Latter-day Saint youth.
Yeah.
He talks about that study from the University of North Carolina, the one that found that these teenagers were doing exceptionally well, like across the board.
Yeah, the one with that awesome headline.
What was it?
Mormon teens cope best.
Oh, yeah, that's the one.
I mean, come on. You read a headline like that, you wonder what their secret is?
Exactly right.
Right.
So President Oaks suggests that a big part of their success comes from this understanding of God's plan.
Okay.
And their belief that they are literally children of God. You know, it gives them this framework for making choices and coping with difficulties that maybe a lot of their peers lack.
Yeah, it's like they have this internal compass.
Right.
This sense of purpose.
Yeah.
That kind of guides them even when things get tough.
Exactly.
And he even suggests that this is something that we can all cultivate, regardless of our background.
Absolutely.
Having a clear understanding of our values and what we believe in can really help us to navigate life's challenges.
And I think that's so important, especially today when we're just bombarded with so much information and so many different viewpoints. It's easy to get lost.
Yeah.
But when you have that strong inner compass, it helps you filter through all the noise.
And stay true to yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, but here's something that I was kind of wrestling with as I was reading this talk.
Okay.
So President Oaks talks about the need for kindness. And he shares that heartbreaking story about the refugee youth who was bullied. But then he also brings up something that President Nelson said to the youth a few months earlier, where he was encouraging them to stand out.
Right.
And to be a light to the world. And those two things seem kind of contradictory to me.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like, how can you stand out without being judgmental or pushing people away?
That's a great question, and it's a tricky balance.
Right.
I think the key is to remember that true strength comes from humility and love.
So it's not about being loud or forceful.
Right.
It's about living in a way that reflects those Christ-like qualities.
Exactly. Compassion, integrity, unwavering love.
Exactly.
And I think that's what draws people in. You know, they see that genuineness, that kindness.
Goodness.
And they're naturally drawn to it.
Yeah, it makes me think back to President Hinckley's description of Latter-day Saint young women.
Oh, yeah. What did he say?
He praised them for their generosity, their support for one another, and their commitment to living their faith.
And President Oaks echoes those sentiments in this talk.
Yeah, he does.
He emphasizes how much the world needs that goodness and that love. And he encourages them to be kind to each other.
Right.
And to see that kindness as a way of drawing closer to Christ.
Yeah, and it makes me think about how we often get caught up in the big grand gestures. But maybe it's those small acts of kindness.
Yeah.
A listening ear, a helping hand, an encouraging word.
Absolutely.
It can really make the biggest difference.
And you know, those small acts can have a ripple effect. They spread outward. And they can transform lives in ways that we might never even fully grasp.
Now, I do have to bring up that story that President Oaks shares about the refugee youth. It's just such a stark reminder that even within a faith community, unkindness can exist.
It can.
And it can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we need to be actively creating a culture of inclusivity and respect.
Yes.
Not just in our words, but in our actions.
And sometimes that means speaking up, even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard.
Right, because silence can be complicity.
That's right.
And when we see someone being mistreated, we have a responsibility to say something.
To intervene.
To do something.
And I think that can be especially hard for young people who are already navigating so many social pressures and anxieties.
Right.
But speaking up, even when it's scary, that's where true courage is revealed.
And that courage can be contagious.
It can.
When one person speaks up, it gives others permission to do the same.
And pretty soon the whole atmosphere shifts towards greater kindness and compassion. And isn't that what we all want?
It is.
A world where everyone feels safe and valued and respected.
Absolutely.
Regardless of their differences.
Okay, before we move on, I want to circle back to President Nelson's youth battalion.
Okay.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think he was calling on the rising generation to be a force for good in the world.
So it's about being engaged, about making a difference.
Exactly.
About really living those principles.
Yeah.
Not just talking about them.
Right. Action speaks louder than words.
And that actually brings us to another really important part of President Oaks's message.
What's that?
His advice on technology.
Oh, yes. He doesn't shy away from that topic.
He doesn't just dismiss it as all bad either.
Right.
But he does challenge listeners to think critically about how they're using it.
Yeah.
He points out how easy it is to get sucked in.
To our phones.
Yeah.
To the internet.
To lose track of time.
And he even shares some pretty startling statistics.
He does.
About how much time teenagers were already spending on their devices back in 2018.
I know, and this is before TikTok.
Right.
And all the social media platforms that have kind of exploded since then.
Like, it's crazy to think about how much things have changed just in the past few years.
Well, you know.
And President Oaks was already sounding the alarm about the potential for technology to distract us.
From what really matters.
Yeah, from our relationships.
From our values.
From our connection with God.
From real life.
Exactly.
And he wasn't trying to demonize technology altogether.
Right.
But he was urging people to be more intentional.
About their usage?
Yes.
To make sure it wasn't becoming a barrier to real-life connection?
Yeah, he even uses the phrase digital distractions.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Which I think is so relevant today.
It's incredible how prescient his message was.
It really is.
You know, we're now seeing the long-term effects of excessive screen time and social media use.
And I think his words are even more powerful now.
Than they were back then.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up this section of the talk, what do you think is the main takeaway here?
I think it's the power of purpose.
Okay.
You know, whether it's understanding God's plan or simply figuring out what your own personal values are.
Yeah.
Having that sense of direction, that sense of meaning, can really make a huge difference in how you navigate life's challenges.
It's like a compass.
Exactly. It helps you stay grounded in the midst of chaos and uncertainty.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into President Oaks' talk, I'm struck by this sense of hope that he weaves throughout the message.
Yes, definitely.
You know, even though he starts by highlighting some pretty concerning trends, declining birth rates, people delaying marriage, there's this underlying optimism.
Yeah, I think he's saying that, you know, yes, the world is changing, but we have the power to shape those changes and to create a better future for ourselves and our families.
And I think that optimism is rooted in this belief that we can overcome challenges and build a more righteous and joyful world if we align ourselves with God's plan and strive to live Christ-like lives.
Absolutely. And it all starts with understanding our divine identity, right?
Right.
Recognizing that we're children of a loving Heavenly Father who wants us to succeed and be happy.
And that's something President Oaks really emphasizes throughout the talk, especially when addressing the youth.
Yeah.
He reminds them that they're not alone in their struggles.
Right.
That God is always there for them and that they have the power to overcome challenges.
Yes. And to make a difference in the world.
It's like a message of empowerment.
It is.
It's like we're not just passive recipients of God's grace, but active participants.
In our own salvation.
Yeah.
In building his kingdom.
And that sense of agency is so crucial, especially in a world that can often feel so overwhelming, like beyond our control.
Right.
But knowing that we have the power to choose, to act, to make a difference.
And be incredibly liberating.
It really is.
It's the antidote to despair and apathy.
It's like that spark
that
ignites hope and inspires action.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we sign off, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on this talk. What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this deep dive?
I think what's so fascinating about President Oaks's message is that it transcends religious boundaries.
Okay.
Whether or not you share his specific beliefs, there's profound wisdom in his emphasis on kindness, purpose, the power of human connection.
Yes.
He reminds us that we're all connected, that our choices impact others.
Absolutely.
And that we have a responsibility to build a world where everyone feels loved and valued and empowered.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
And I think it perfectly captures the spirit of this talk.
Yeah.
It's a call to action, an invitation to embrace our divine potential.
Yes.
And a reminder that even small acts of kindness can make a big difference.
They can have a ripple effect, transforming lives and communities.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a reminder that families are the foundation of society.
They are.
Strengthening families. Nurturing children.
Yeah.
Creating a world where they can thrive.
Absolutely.
This isn't just a religious imperative.
Hey.
It's a societal imperative.
And it's something we can all contribute to.
Yeah.
Regardless of our beliefs or background.
So to our listener,
yes,
as you go about your day, consider this. How can you be a force for good in your own sphere of influence?
Yeah.
How can you embody those principles of kindness, purpose, and love that President Oaks so eloquently articulated?
What small act of kindness can you perform today that might have a ripple effect?
Creating a more joyful and compassionate world.
For yourself and for others.
We hope this deep dive has given you food for thought, inspired you to make a difference.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.